these work? Oh, I think this is working now. Hi, Cameron. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the surveys. So you guys have several surveys that you have to do. I think there is, 3 of them. Hi, Sophia. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show you what surveys that you need to do. So I'm going to bring this over here. So when you log on to eCampus, you don't have to use that special browser or anything. Try to center this up here a bit. All right, so you're going to log on to eCampus. You're going to click Surveys and Bonus down here. And then normally if we would have had class, we would have done the post ACT. We can't do that one anymore because ACT is copyrighted and they can't put it online because of copyright laws. So you need to do the facilitator evaluation, the web end of semester survey, and the mathematics attitude survey. So it's the 3 in the middle. This one here, it will have a password. That's for me only. So you won't do the last one. So they're easy points. They're very easy to do. And I believe there should be another one in your email. So if you check your mixed email, you should have that. So the first thing that you guys will need to do is your 3 surveys. And it's the ones in the middle. So that's the first thing you're going to have to do. All right, now on the final, there's 2 parts of the final. And I highly recommend that you do one probably on Thursday, part 1 Thursday, and part 2 on Friday, okay? Because they're pretty difficult. I don't want to scare you, but they are challenging. They're probably one of the hardest ones out of mine. We study these in 2 different parts. When we do your questions, I'm going to give them all in the 2 different parts for you, okay? All right, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to add on the extra ones that is not on the final. So I'm just going to flip over to the first blank page on the back of the study guide. So this is going to be all for part 1. A little bit better for you. All right, and the first thing I would tell you to do is do the online review for the final and all 4 of the other study guides, because the other practice tests, I saw questions on the real final. And you know how every time you open up the final, it's not the same version. So I would definitely do your practice tests. Do all practice reviews first. Because there were some questions pretty much word for word from all the study guides. Okay, the first question, this is coming from section 8.3 on page 641. And that's with establishing the identities. These were all of the proof questions, okay? So this one is check all of the following that are equivalent. Of course, they're going to give you a different question. And then they're going to give you an equation. Of course, every time you open this, I'm sure the equations are all going to be different. Okay, so this one here is going to be secant to the 4th power theta minus secant squared theta. And then there's going to be check boxes, and this is going to be one of the check all that apply. So we'll have tan squared theta minus tan to the 4th of theta. Tan to the 4th of theta plus tan squared theta. 1 minus tan squared theta, and then times that by tan squared theta. Secant squared -1 plus secant squared theta. And the last one is secant squared theta tan squared theta. Alright, I'm just going to give you a second to write that down. I know that I write very quickly. It's probably definitely way more important to write down the problem and then the boxes than it really is the directions. Alright, you got several different ways you can attempt this problem. You can start with your answer and try to get the original problem, or you could start with the original problem and then try to get the answer. And really, until you're looking at the problem, you don't know which one's the best method. I'm going to just start with the original problem, and I'm going to factor. So if I'm looking at both things, I can see I can take out a secant squared theta. So that's where I'm going to start. So then I'm left with secant squared theta minus 1. Okay, so if I look at my answers, this is the exact same thing as this. The only thing they did was flip those two around, but the signs were still the same, so we're going to go ahead and check box that one. Alright, now if you get out your identity card that we made at the very beginning of the year, we have here that tan squared theta plus 1 equals secant squared theta. Alright, so if I minus 1 on both sides, I have secant squared theta minus 1, that gives me tan squared theta. So this now turns into secant squared theta, and that's a tan squared theta. Okay, so that would be that one. Okay, and then secant squared theta, go back to your card, is tan squared theta plus 1. And then I have this times tan squared theta. Okay, so if I look at my answers, this is close, but it's not the same. The signs are different, so this one's probably not going to be an answer. All right, and then I can do distributive property here. So I have tan to the 4th theta plus tan squared theta. And that would be this one over here. And it can't be that one because the signs are wrong. Okay, the next one, this one should be fairly easy. Even if we hadn't gone over this one, I'm pretty sure you would all get this one correct. So this is, what are A and B? In the picture below. And then they're going to give you a picture. So 8A, 60 degrees, and then here's B. So this is just using the trig identities that we have learned in the beginning. This one's probably one of the easier problems on the final. So you just start here, and I know the opposite and adjacent, so O over A, so that would be sine of 60 equals 8 over B. We'll times both sides by B. So B sine of 60 equals 8. Divide everything by sine of 60. And then you just type that into the calculator. And since 60 is degrees, make sure your calculator's in degrees. So I get 9.23. And I believe these are a short answer on here, so this is one where you would have to read and it would tell you how many decimal places to type in. Okay, going back to the beginning, I have an O and an A, so that would be tan of 60 equals 8 over A. Times both sides by A. A tan of 60 equals 8. Divide by tan of 60. And then we just type that in a calculator. So that gives me 4.61. Okay, so the next one for test part 1, I saw from practice test number 1. And it was question 11. And it was like true and false. So that one may be on your final. Of course, every time you open it up, it generates another one. I thought you could just go back through and read through that real quick on your own time. The only one that I wanted to go over, because the only one I really think that you'll second guess yourself, is this one here. So it says if sine of x equals 1/3, then the hypotenuse of the right triangle with the interior x, the interior angle, x is 3. And this was a true and false section. So of course we all know that sine is O over H. So your inkling is to say, well, yeah, H is 3, so this has to be true, but this is false because it's just a ratio. So it doesn't have to be 3. So if you had the sine of x equaling 2 over 6, there the hypotenuse is 6, but 2 over 6 reduces to 1/3, but the hypotenuse is 6 and not 3. Okay, so that was the only one that might trip you up. I thought the other ones were pretty straightforward, so just go back to your study guide and look that one back over again. Okay, so now we're going to go back through and we're going to do all of part 1's in the packet. So these were all of the extra ones from part 1. I would do part 1 on Thursday. Okay, so when you're looking at your 2 different parts, part 1 has 16 questions. And they're all different. They're like multiple choice, check all that apply, fill in the short answer blank. There is no paragraph, okay? And one of the questions is just like question 1 on here where it says you can't use a graphing calculator and anything like that. So technically it's 15 questions. Part 2 has the same thing. So ditto for part 2. So part 2 also has 15 questions. So part 1 and part 2 both have 15 questions. I think you get 50 minutes for each section. So you get 50 minutes for this one and 50 minutes for that one. I would do part 1 on Thursday and part 2 on Friday. Trust me, it is a little bit difficult and you don't want to fry your brain doing it all at once. So break this up into 2 different days. Take advantage of that. If you were in college campus, you have to do the whole thing in one shebang. But luckily, we get a little bit of leeway with that. Okay. So we're going to go to question 2. This is all on part 1. So question 2, question 3, and question 4, those are for part 1. They will not show up again on part 2, I don't think. Pretty sure I just saw these on part 1. Okay, so find the equivalent I to the 7th power. So I like to take the number that they give it to you and divide it by 2. So 7 divided by 2 would be 3.5. So this is I squared to the 3rd power. And then since it didn't come out perfect, you have an extra I on the end. I squared is -1. So this is -1 to the 3rd power times I. -1 to the 3rd power would be -1. So this would be -I. Of course, all they're going to do is change that exponent. Concept's the same, different exponent. Okay, how do you convert the point 7 260 degrees into rectangular coordinates? You only have to do the x. So you're going to need to read this. This will probably change on the final. X versus y. Okay, so if it's an x, you're going to use x equals r cos of theta. If it had said y, you would do y equals r sine of theta. You're going to have to read which one it is. Okay, so this is your R. 263 degrees is your theta. So we're just going to plug that in. So x equals 7 cos 263. Okay, we just type that into our calculator. 7 cos 260. Oh, I can't type today. 263. All right, so I get negative 8.5. They want 1 decimal place. So I'm going to need to round that. So that's negative 0.9. Okay, question 4. An isosceles triangle has 2 equal side lengths of 4 and an angle of 127 degrees. Find the length of the other side. Give the answer to 2 decimal places. Okay, so we have lengths of 4 and 127 degrees. All right, now, if you know anything about isosceles triangles, you know that these base angles have to be the same degrees. If you did that and you did law of sines, then you're going to have to check all your answers to make sure that this isn't one of the cases that has 2 triangles. So a better thing to do would be to use the law of cosines. That way you don't have to check your answers. So that would be c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cos of c. Okay, so your c would be the degrees, your a and b would be your 4s. 4 squared plus 4 squared minus 2 times 4 times 4 cos of 127. Okay, then I'm going to need to plug this in. Okay, so that gives me 51.25. And that's c squared, remember? So I need to square root that thing. That's not your answer. All right, so we're going to square root that. 51.25. That gives me 7.158. So they want 2 decimal places, so 7.16. And this is pretty much the format. It's going to be multiple choice, short answer, but no paragraphs. No explaining anything, so that's good. All right. Okay, let's turn the page. Okay, question 5 was on part 1. So I'm highlighting things so you know which ones to study for which days. So question 5 is part 1. Question 6 is part 1. Question 7 is part 1. Question 8 is part 1. Question 9 is part 1. Question 10 is part 1. Okay, so we're going to go back and look at question 5. Find the angle between the 2 vectors, 2i plus 3j and w is 4i minus 4j. Answer to the nearest degrees. You need to make sure you have this formula memorized. The cos of theta is u times v, that's the dot product, divided by the magnitude of u and the magnitude of v. Okay, so for the dot product, we're going to do 2 times 4 plus 3 times negative 4. And then the magnitude, you take the square root and you just square both of these and add them together. 2 squared plus 3 squared. And then the second one, you square these and add them together. So 4 squared plus negative 4 squared. Okay. All right, typing in the top. So the top gives me negative 4 when I type that in. And then we'll just type in the bottom part. Probably separately, I'm thinking. Okay, so square root. Well, we'll just do 2 squared plus 3 squared. All right, so 2 squared is 4. 3 squared is 9. 9 plus 4, that's going to be the square root of 13. Okay, here 4 squared is 16, and that's another 16, so that would be a 32. All right, and then from that point, what you want to do is get you the cos inverse of this. So we could times 32 and 13 together to make that a little bit shorter. So this is going to be negative 4 over the square root of 416. And then we're going to do the cos inverse of this. So negative 4 divided by the square root of 416. Okay, so that gives me 101.3. And they said answer to the nearest degree, so that would just be 101. You are going to have to read on the final because he does change how many places you round to. Okay, so they're going to give you a vector, 3i plus 6j. Find the magnitude, the length of the vector. Give your answer to 2 decimal places. So this is probably another, if you know the thing, it's one of the easiest questions on the final. So this is the square root of 3 squared plus 6 squared. Okay, so 3 squared is 9, 6 squared is 36, 9 and 36 would be 45. And we just figure out what's the square root of 45. 6.708, 2 decimal places, so 6.71. Okay, question 7, calculate the dot product. That is also very easy and was on the final too. So it's 3 times 6 plus negative 3 times 8. All right. So 3 times 6 would be 18 minus 24, so that's going to be a negative 6. Okay, question 6. Find the exact value of 1 minus cos squared of x is if x equals 60 degrees. You could do your trig circle, and we know what 60 degrees is. I would personally just type this in the calculator. So just make sure that calculator is in degrees. Questions you're going to need to spend a little bit more time on than others. So this is one where you can get away with making it be really quick by just typing it in, do it. So when you type it in, the square goes after it. So it's going to be 1 minus the cos of 60 squared, like that. Okay, type that in, I get 3/4. 0.75 is 3/4. If you didn't know how to do that on the calculator, you could do second, and then this F to D will turn it from decimal to fraction. Hit the enter button, and that will give it to you the fraction as 3/4. Or take all your answers and divide them out and get your decimals. Okay, number 9 and number 10, I feel like those were word for word on the final. Okay. So fill in the blank. If U equals AI plus BJ and V equals CI minus DJ, we're going to do U minus V. Okay. So it's going to be, you take the first two numbers and you're going to subtract them, and then you'll take the second two numbers and subtract them. So you're going to do this one and that one. So it's going to be A minus C, because this is tagging to minus. Then we're going to take the second numbers on here. So B, and that's already a minus. So what we're really doing is we're doing B minus negative D, and two negatives turn into a positive, so this is going to be B plus D. My gut tells me if you put B minus negative D in there, it's probably going to mark that wrong in the computer. Or take a point or two off. I don't really know for sure, but I feel like it. And when you take your final, you're not going to be able to look through the questions again. So you won't ever know which ones you missed. Okay, question 10. This is pretty much the same thing. You're just going to add them instead of subtracting them. So you're going to take the first two numbers, so A and C, and you're going to add those. So this is going to be A plus C. And then you'll take the second two numbers and you'll add those. So B plus D. And you'll notice he didn't have it negative on this one. So he did change it up a little bit. You will have to watch the pluses and minuses. Okay. Alrighty. Oh. Alright, I think there was more on part 1 that skipped through. Okay, yes. So turn to the last page. We're going to do all part 1s first, and then we'll go and do all of part 2. So we got 2 more questions for part 1. Question 18 and question 21. So I'm going to highlight those. 18 is part 1. And down here at the bottom, 21 is part 1. We'll go back and do the part 2s after we're done with all the part 1s. So don't worry about that. Okay, so we're going to start with 18. This, again, should be one of the easiest questions on the final. So sine of x would be opposite over adjacent. Or, wow, I said that way wrong. Opposite over hypotenuse. Wow. Okay, so this is opposite over hypotenuse. Diagonal from your x would be your opposite. Diagonal from the 90 is your hypotenuse. And beside the x would be your adjacent. Okay, so this is going to be B and R. So that would be letter E. Okay, cos is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse, so that's A over R. So that's going to be a C. Tan is opposite over hypotenuse, so B over A. So that's B. Cotan is going to be adjacent over opposite, so that would be A over B, so that would be F. Okay, secant is opposite of cos, so you can always just look at your cos answer and just flip them over, but it's going to be hypotenuse over adjacent, so R over A. So that's D. And the last one has to be A because we didn't use it yet. But that's going to be hypotenuse over opposite. So that one, again, fairly easy question. Okay, and question 21 is the last one for part 1. All right, so that is calculate the dot product. Again, another dot product question. Those are great because they're easy. So 3 times 5 plus -3 times 6. Okay, so 3 times 5 is 15. -3 times 6 is -18, so that's going to be -3 for the answer. And that's everything for part 1. And then we're going to have to go through and do part 2. I personally felt like part 2 was a lot more difficult than part 1, mostly because I felt like part 2 concentrated a lot on definitions and understanding meanings of things. So I thought part 2 was a little bit more difficult. Okay, so we're going to go back to the blank side of a paper. Not the first one, but the second one. Okay, so this is part 2. This is the one I would do on Friday. Okay, I'm gonna highlight this one with the oranges. All right, so part 2. All right, and this first question I thought was a little bit difficult at first because I don't ever remember doing anything with it. It's not hard, but it was one that you're like, what are they even asking? All right, so we have simplify. And we're going to do 6 sine of 5 pi over 6 plus 4 sine pi over 3. And then it says so that it is expressed in the form a plus b, and then it's square root, but he'll have it spelled out like that. Square root c, where a, b, and c are all integers. No decimals. I don't know. This one just threw me for a loop because I was looking at it and I'm like, well, what formula am I supposed to use? And I kept looking over here and I'm like, well, what formula is that? I don't recognize it. And there is no formula. All they want you to do is actually just reduce this. And until that clicked in my head, I was like, oh, okay, this isn't that bad. Alright, so the first thing we got to do is figure out 5 pi over 6. So 180 would be 6 pi over 6, so that's going to be over here. So this is 5 pi over 6. Alright, since it's a 6 on the bottom, I know that my reference angle is 30 degrees. And I know the square root 3 can't be diagonal from the 30, so I know that this has to be a 1. This is going to be a negative square root of 3. And then the hypotenuse has to be 2. Okay, so I'm going to start with the 6. I'll have that there. And the sine of this thing would be 1 over 2. Okay, now I'm going to need another triangle for pi over 3. I'm just going to use the same picture. So I know the 3's on the bottom, so the reference angle has to be 60. So diagonal from the 60 has to be the square root 3 the 1 and then the 2. So I've got the 4 from the front. And then the sign of this thing has to be square root 3 over 2. Okay, so we just need to reduce this here. So 6 divided by 2 would be 3. The 4 and the 2, 4 divided by 2 would be 2 square root 3. All right, now your answer is going to be just boxes with A equaling, B equaling, and C equaling. And you would fill in the boxes. Okay, so what they're saying is this piece is A, this piece is B, and that piece is C. All right, so my first answer would be 3. B would be 2. All right, now C is a little bit confusing because it says A, B, and C are all integers. Okay, integer means it's positive or it's negative. No decimals, no square roots mean. Okay, so you're not going to put square root 3, you're just going to put the plain 3 in because the square root's already implied. So you're just going to put down the number under the square root. Okay, so hopefully that one won't trip you up. It's not as bad as it looks. It's just, I don't really feel like we ever did this kind of problem in a class at all. Or maybe we did and it was so long ago I didn't remember it. Okay, next question. This is a fill in the blank. Okay, so fill in the first blank with either a positive or a negative, and they mean the word. So you'll type in the word, positive or negative. And the second and third blanks with positive integers. Well, I messed up on my example problem because I didn't make mine be an integer. It will work out on the final though. Okay. Positive or negative, and the second and third blanks with positive integers. Okay, so if cos of theta equals -1/2 in quadrant 2, then the sine of theta is, and then here's the first blank where you put in the word positive or negative, and the ratio is, and then this was worded, I thought, a little weird, but he's trying to tell you here that that's the I don't even know why he uses A, but it's just A over R, so it's the opposite and the hypotenuse. He just picked random letters there. Where A equals blank and R equals blank. Okay, so we're going to start with our trig circle. So this is always skip trig class. All right, so we're in quadrant 2. So sine is positive in quadrant 2. Okay, so you're going to put that down. All right, we have in here that this is -1/2. I know that has to be the square root of 3. You'll see here why I messed up. So the A would be the opposite. They want the ratio in the way that it is. So A would be the square root of 3, which I messed up because it's not a positive integer. When you get your final, it will work out where it'll be a positive integer. And the hypotenuse is 2. But you get the idea. This is just a concept thing. Okay, next one. So for what numbers x from negative pi to positive pi is the graph of y equals sine of x decreasing. Okay, now he can change this a lot of different ways. This could turn into a cos or a tan. That could turn into an increasing. So there's several different ways that this problem could change on your final. All right, this one's a multiple choice one. Okay, so A is from 0 to pi. B is from negative pi to 0. C is from negative pi over 2 to positive pi over 2. D is negative pi to pi. And E, negative pi to negative pi over 2, and positive pi over 2 to pi. Okay, so we're going to draw this graph on here. So I'm going to go, it starts at 0, and this is 2 pi. Half of 2 pi is pi, so this has to be pi over 2, and that one would be 3 pi over 2. Not 2, I think that's a 4. 3 pi over 4. Okay. And then we have this one over here. So this is going to be your negative pi. And this is going to be your negative pi over 2. So we just need to figure out where are we going down. All right, so we are going down from here to here. So negative pi to negative pi over 2. And from pi over 2 to pi. The 2 pi over here doesn't count. So this is letter E. So make sure you know what your graphs look like. You're not going to be given a graphing calculator, so you're going to need to memorize at least definitely sine and cos. Those would be the two that I would make sure that I know what they look like. Okay, these next ones. So you need to know the steps of using the Morvay's, I can't say his name, theorem. I think this was 10.3. Let me look. I feel like 10.3 is about the section where all this stuff is. Yep. So this is section 10.3. He did a lot of definitions from section 10.3. So if it were me, I would go through 10.3 and read through all of those yellow boxes, more conceptual things of it. So this is 10.3, which page 753. So make sure you know definitely what step 1 is. So know step 1. Okay, this next one, look over the definitions of the absolute value of z, where z is a complex number. Like I said, I can't really go over this without giving you the answers, and I'm sorry, because they're not actually like working out problems. They're multiple choice, and it's just kind of like you either know the definition or you don't. Okay, know the and I think all of these are from 10.3. There was like 3 questions on my final on this, and I was like, no, this isn't even like working a problem out. This is, you gotta know the definition. Okay, know the definition of the magnitude of a vector. So just trust me. Just get your book out and read through the yellow definitions on there and make sure that you know what they are. And maybe not even that, like for the absolute value, that's on page 752. Like even the white word. So this is like the second paragraph down from the top. So just read that definition. Make sure that you read like the very top down and including the first yellow box. Okay. So I would just read through all of these sections. And then this other one I think is on page 751. And this is toward the bottom. Okay, so just look through those. Trust me, you're gonna need to know them. Okay, the next one we're gonna do is in your book. I'm not gonna really draw this one out. It's page 768, 15 to 22. So I'm just going to bring up the book and show you the picture. And when you see it, you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This is why we're not drawing it out. Okay. So 15 to 22, that was this section right here. So for 15, A plus B would have to be equal to F. So it's just being able to read these kind of questions. 16, K plus G would also equal F. All right, 17. I think these were all true or false. So these two would be true. 17, C equals D minus E plus F. Remember, the minus changes the arrow direction, okay? So D, E, and F. Yep, that's definitely C because that connects all of that chunk. So 17 would be true. Okay, so it's just problems like that. So I think the only thing you really need to know on that section is that a negative would flip the arrow directions. Okay. All right, next one. What formula is equivalent to the law of cosines when gamma equals 270 degrees? Okay, so I would write down your formula. So c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cos of c. Make sure you have that memorized. Your c is going to be 270. So if you type in 270 in here, the cos of 270, you get that that's 0. So this whole thing is going to be 0. So basically you're looking at c squared equals a squared plus b squared, and that's the Pythagorean theorem. So you'll see something similar to that. Okay, the next one, we'll work it out and everything, but I am not going to write the whole question down. This is practice test 4. Question number 9. Okay, so this says a man-made triangular lake which serves a small town needs to be cleaned. Each month the town cleans debris off of the surface of the lake. It costs the town $2 per square meter to clean the lake's surface. Okay. It says if the dimensions of the lake are 213, 290, and 401 meters, find the total monthly cost for the lake cleanup to the nearest dollar. Answer as an integer with no dollar sign included. Alright, so it says that it's a triangle. Alright, we have 213, 290, and then your area is the square root of s minus a, s minus. So we have 1/2 213 plus 290 plus 401. Poor connection. Make my connection better. Oh, is that better? And we're just going to plug that in, and then 452 minus 401. All right. Okay, I'm just going to type everything. Oh, that is not, I did something wrong. That is not the right answer. Okay, let's try this again. That is definitely not the right answer. I'm not sure what I'm typing in wrong, but that is not the right answer. I'm typing something wrong. 452 minus 213 minus 290. I don't know. Number I just incorporated. That's why it doesn't look right. So second square root, second answer. That looks better. 29875.196. Okay, now this costs $2, so we're going to times it by 2. 0.392. Okay, now we're going to go back through the rest of the packet. Okay, question 11. I did not see that on my version of the final. That doesn't mean it's not going to be on the final, but I didn't see it on version 1 or version 2. Same thing with question 13. So we'll go ahead and answer these. Oh, it's 12, sorry. We'll answer them, but I didn't see them on the final. That doesn't mean they won't be there. Okay, so orthogonal is perpendicular, so that's V times W has to equal 0. Okay, so I did see this on the final. I definitely saw question 11 on the final. I think I just didn't write it down. I think question 11 was on part 2, because I remember that being on there. So I took this just yesterday, so I think question 11 was on part 2. I think I just forgot to mark it. Question 12 I didn't see for sure. Okay, so this is a times 2 plus -1 times 4 has to equal 0. So this is 2a minus 4 equals 0. Add your 4 to both sides. So 2a equals 4. Divide by 2 and a equals 2. That one's not too bad. That was probably one of the easier ones that was on part 2. Okay, question 12. I did not see that on the final, I don't think. Okay, here's how I would do it. I would make a chart. So we have theta. And you want to pick the numbers that are on here. So I'm going to have -90 on there. Okay, then we're going to have 180 on there. This isn't in order, but that's okay. A 90, and then a 45. I'm just putting these because these were the numbers that was in the answer key. Okay. Alright, so this is r equals 2 plus sine of theta. So you're just going to plug in your things. So 2 plus the sine of -90, and you'll type that in your calculator. So that gives me 1. So I'm going to pick the second one down then, because that gives me 1 and the first one was -1. So that would be that one. Then we're going to do 2 plus the sine of 180. So that gives me 2. So we're going to pick that one. Then we're going to change this 2 plus the sine of 90. So that gives me 3. So we'll pick this one. And then the last one, 2 plus the sine of 45. And that gives me 2.707. And that is not one of our answers, because that's just plain 2. 12 wasn't on any of the finals that I saw. Okay, question 13. Let's turn the page. Okay. 13, 14, and 15. I saw all of these on part 2. Now 13, he's probably going to just change the picture of the graph, but it's going to be pretty similar to this. So 1, 0. So at 0, we are over here. You're going to have to just assume that that's 1. There's no real tick marks. 0, -1. So 180. To get to the negative, you have to be on the opposite side. So that is correct. Okay, the next one. 1 at 135. So 135 would have to be somewhere over here. That looks a little questionable. We're probably going to have to do more investigation on that one. And that one. 0 at 30 degrees. Well, that's another questionable one, I feel like. So the best thing to do is get your equation that he gives you and type these things in the calculator. not 100% sure on. Oh, I want the degrees with the 135. So the cos of 3 times 135, that's 0.707. It's close to 1. I mean, it kind of looked like it possibly could have been 1, but it's definitely not 1. It's about that one. I mean, I know it hit 0 at some point, but I don't know the actual degrees on there. So cos of 3 times 30, that one is 0. Oh, man. Guys, I'm really sorry about well, I didn't want to do that. Nobody wants to see the ceiling. I was trying to see if there was a way for me to click a button to get a different stream rate. I'm not seeing that option on there. I'm really sorry about the connection, guys. Okay, part 2, question 14. Calculate a unit vector in the direction of the vector 3i plus 4j. Anytime he says in the direction of, that's your key word that he's talking about parallel. Okay, so we're going to use the formula for parallel, which is u equals v divided by the magnitude of v. Okay, so my vector is 3i plus 4j divided by the square root of 3 squared plus 4 squared. Okay, so I have 3i plus 4j. Okay, so 3 squared would be 9, 4 squared would be 16, 9 plus 16 would be 25, and the square root of 25 is 5. All right, and then all I need to do is get these things in as a decimal. Plus 4 divided by 5. No, I forgot the I. 0.8j. If v equals I minus j and negative I minus j are vectors, are they orthogonal in the same direction, which means parallel? Or neither? Okay, so remember we always start with this formula. Cos of theta is v times w divided by the magnitude of v, the magnitude of w. We always work out the dot product on the top first. If it's 0, I don't have to finish the whole thing because then I know that they are orthogonal. Okay, so I've got 1 times negative 1 on the top plus negative 1 times negative 1. Okay, so this is negative 1 plus 1, so that's going to be a 0 on the top, so I know that these are orthogonal. If it hadn't been 0 on the top, I would have to keep going, and then if I got a 0 after I did cos inverse, then I would put parallel down. Okay, question 16. I did not see this on the final. That doesn't mean that it won't be on yours, but I didn't see it on the one that I looked at. The unit vector I is orthogonal to the unit vector j. So basically we are looking at 1 times 0, because this didn't have an I, plus 0 times 1, and that equals 0, so that is true. Okay, the sine of t equals sine of negative t, that is false because the negative comes out in the front. Cos is when it disappeared. All right, sine of 45 equals the cos of 45. Well, just type those things in. Sine 45 0.707. Cos 45, 0.707, that's true. Sine and cos are both positive in quadrant 3. Well, always skip trig class. The only one positive in quadrant 3 is tan, so that's definitely false. The dot products of vectors are always commutative, meaning 3 times 4 is the same thing as 4 times 3. That is true. When you multiply complex numbers, you multiply their arguments. That is false because you would FOIL. You would have to do distributive properties. So if I had 3 plus 2i times 4 plus 3i, you would FOIL these things. The reciprocal of the sine function is the secant function. That is false. That would be the cosecant. The domain of sine inverse of x is -1 to 1. That is true. Pi radians is 360 degrees. That is false. It's 180. The law of sines reduces to the Pythagorean theorem in a right triangle. Well, the law of sines doesn't even need a right triangle, so that is false. And vectors have both magnitude and direction. That is true. All right, and then this continues on the next page. All right, the midpoint of 2 endpoints of a circle's diameter is the circle's radius. Okay, so let's look at that. The midpoint of 2 endpoints. There we go, 2 endpoints. Here's the middle. Is the radius. That's false. It can be. It doesn't have to be though. So that's false. Okay, 17 was on the final part 2, and number 20 was part 2. And actually, I really thought I would have seen something like 19 on my final. I was hoping, but I didn't. I think because it was just on every single test, it was too easy. Okay, find... Oh, this is why I didn't highlight it on the other page, because I saw it on this page. Is this the exact same one we just did? Yes, it is. That's why I didn't highlight that one. Okay, that problem is identical to question 11. So that's why I did miss that one. So we already did this one. I'm not going to do it twice. So the answer is 2. And that was question 11. Okay, so that makes sense why I didn't highlight it twice. I just didn't realize they had the same question on there twice. Okay, we will do 19. Just because I think these are important to do. So you can just type them in the calculator, honestly. Maybe we should just skip it. It's so easy. I don't know. Sine pi divided by 6. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong because I'm not in radians. Just make sure you're in radians. Okay, 0.5. So that would be D. I'm just going to run through these because I have the answers already written down. This one is B, A, C, and A. Okay. Just type those in the calculator. Make sure it's in radians. Nothing hard with that one. Okay, and question 20. Given that V equals 2i plus 8j, find the magnitude of the vector. Give your answer to 2 decimal places. You pray to God you get one of these. So it's just 2 squared plus 8 squared. Okay, so 2 squared would be 4. 8 squared would be 64. So that would be the square root of 68. And we just type that in. And I get 8.25. Okay, I think that's the last page. All right, I am so sorry that that was so long. If we were in class, we would have separated this out over 2 to 3 days instead of putting that in one session. But I really hope that this helps you see what questions are in part 1, what questions are in part 2. Definitely do your test in 2 different days. I actually worked out the test, and by the time I was done with test 1, my brain was fried. And I would not want to do test 2 right after it, okay? So you need to take your final Thursday. You need to do test 1. So I don't think I have my calendar handy. So Thursday, you need to do final test 1. All right. And Friday, then you need to do final test 2. Okay, so this is what you need to do on Friday. Now you will need to go and use that browser that you did for test 4, the lockdown browser. Make sure you tell your family that you are taking your final and that no one is to disrupt you for that hour. I would already have my blank piece of paper with me, your calculator with you. I think they said that you guys are allowed to use it has to be a specialized formula paper, and I will double check on that. If you are, then I will send that to you in an attachment on the Remind app, and you'd print it out, and it has to be that paper. You can't write anything down on that paper or anything, but I think there's a formula sheet that you can use on the final. I just need to double check to make sure that you're still allowed to use it, which is good news. So you won't have to remember a million formulas on there. Okay? So is there any questions before we sign off on here for your final or anything? If you watched the entire video today, then you should be doing really well for your final. And make sure that you have all of your labs are done, all of your surveys are done, and then you need to send me your homework and lab grades to me as an attachment. Okay, so I need your homework, pictures as in live grades. Send that to me as an attachment. If you haven't already, you need all of the homework quiz links done. I call them quiz links, but all of the ones that are, but I will double check. So all labs, there was 10 of them. I think that's it. And your surveys. Don't forget about your surveys. That's your bonus. You're going to want that because this final 7:30 to 10:30. Okay, so make sure that you guys are doing your final before 7:30. So make sure you do it during the morning or the afternoon, not the evening. Okay? Good point. Thanks for noticing that, Sophia. Because everybody's starting to basically be done with their finals. Okay? Alright, well, I think that's everything, and I think we can go ahead and sign off here, okay? Alright, you guys have a good day, and hopefully we will do well. You'll see your finals as soon as you're done taking it. Take a picture of it, and send me the link, or send me the picture of your finals, okay? Because you'll see your grade immediate, but you won't be able to see what problems you missed, which is frustrating, but it is what it is. All right, you guys have a good afternoon.